The latter half of the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century has seen an explosion in new drugs, pharmacopoeia, which have improved the quality of life and extended our lifespans. But not all drugs are efficacious, and occasionally there are serious and debilitating side effects. In countries at large, there's then a policy question as to how to put in place a regulatory process which balances the twin demands of need and safety. This is typically done within the province of a country in something like a Food and Drugs Authority, an FDA. In the United States, for example, when a company files a new drug application, it goes to the research arm, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. The process is long, cumbrous, and expensive. On average, the amount of time it takes from a drug to be conceived in a laboratory in a company and to wind its way to a pharmacy shelf, on average it's about 12 years, and on average it costs about $350 million. This is big business. Okay? And many drugs don't make it to the door. Some drugs are discarded early in the process because they're found to be not efficacious. And more seriously, other drugs are discarded at some stage in this process because they're found to have serious side effects. The process, for example, in the United States goes roughly as follows. A drug is first conceived in the laboratory, and sometimes animal studies are done. Just to give you an instance at random, the condition called osteoporosis deals with bone loss and afflicts a lot of people worldwide. In the United States, the number of people afflicted is of the order of maybe 10 million. And the cost of treating it runs into upward of $1 billion a year. This is expensive. Now, a treatment for osteoporosis was discovered by understanding the hormonal mechanisms that the body uses to control bone loss. So the human body secretes a hormone called calcitonin, which regulates bone loss. A happy discovery, and this is a fishy tale, was that salmon secreted the same hormone. But it turns out salmon calcitonin, when ingested by humans, is 30 times as potent as human calcitonin. And so now we have the basis, a suggested direction for the creation of a drug. And eventually it was created synthetically by essentially copying the genetic signature of a salmon calcitonin in the laboratory. Essentially all drugs follow this kind of pathway. There's a discovery process where a drug is posited, maybe from nature, and then it's created. This is then filed with the Food and Drugs Association for approval. A new drugs application is filed. In the United States, it promptly goes then, if approved for a clinical trial, into what's called a phase 1 clinical trial, where something like of the order of 80 healthy individuals are given the drug. Of course, there is full transparency here, and they are told what the drug is supposed to be doing and what is known about it. The idea of this first phase in the clinical trial is to establish parameters, profiles for the drug, and figure out what its likely side effects are. This process usually takes about a year. If you emerge from this and the FDA says, continue, then you move to a phase 2 trial, where now it's much larger. Something of the order of about 800 individuals could be solicited, or maybe 300 individuals. And these individuals are then tested for efficacy. Does the drug work as advertised, or perhaps more accurately, as hoped? Are there any serious side effects which are immediately obvious? So if you test it on about 300 individuals, you're going to get a slightly more confident pronouncement. This phase typically takes about 2 years. And if the company successfully navigates phase 2, Then they move on to phase 3, which is now a large clinical test, testing of the order of 3,000 individuals. And now you're seriously examining whether there are side effects, debilitating or serious. How does this drug interact with other drugs? This process can take 3 years. From start to finish, the process can take 12 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. This is very big business. And in the process, a very large number of drugs just fall by the wayside. They turn out to be not very efficacious, not work as advertised, and occasionally have serious side effects. The process tends to work well, except, of course, when it doesn't. And occasionally, there is a spectacular apparent failure of the regulatory process. One such recent example was of the anti-inflammatory drug called Vioxx. It was marketed by Merck. It was approved by the FDA in 1999 and was a blockbuster. This was a part of the family of pain-controlling drugs called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. It used a particular new pathway called a COX-2 inhibitor, but the details don't matter for our purposes. It is somewhat different from its mechanisms from the way aspirin works, for example, or Tylenol. This drug was a blockbuster. For example, in the year 2003, Merck reportedly made about $2.5 billion from the sale of this drug. And then in 2004, Merck withdrew the drug from the market just ahead of being forced by the FDA to do this because of a discovery that the drug caused an enhanced and serious cardiovascular problem in a chunk of the patients who took the drug. It is estimated that something like 100,000 patients who took the drug in the previous years came down with severe cardiac conditions. Now, how could this happen? I mean, after this entire long regulatory process, how could something like this have slipped through? Of course, sometimes errors happen because of willful tweaking of the data. In other words, with malice aforethought. Sometimes errors can happen because of accidents. And sometimes errors happen because life happens. You see, absolute certainty in a chance-driven world is a will-o'-the-wisp. It flutters here and there. And no matter how hard you try, you can't grasp it. It slips through your fingers. Sometimes it's just the nature of chance. Another example from recent years was the diabetes drug called Avandia, marketed by GlaxoSmithKline. In this case, the drug again was approved in 1999 by the FDA. But there were concerns about its adverse potential effect on cardiac function. And in 2010, the FDA required GlaxoSmithKline to restrict the sale of the drug because of these health concerns. By 2013, the FDA had revised and overturned their original judgment. They returned Avandia to the shelf, saying there's no evidence that it causes unnecessary distress in a cardiopulmonary sense. And again, we have this issue where a drug was examined over a very long period of time, a lot of data were collected, and apparently absolute certainty wasn't within our grasp. Of course, in both these cases, the side effects that were posited were very serious. They were life-threatening. So, how does drug testing actually work? And does it really work?